Morning, everyone. This morning, we're going to tackle a recent headline, major event that took place with the crashing of a helicopter in Iran and the death of their president, Ibrahim Raisi. There's sources in the chat, and we'll look at a couple of reactions to launch the conversation. And talk a little bit about the religious ramifications or reactions, as well as the general topic, as is evidenced by the title of our presentation: Ding Dong, Raisi is dead, rejoicing over the death of enemies. Hopefully people got the Wizard of Oz reference. If so, 2 extra points. If not, you're still welcome to study with us. Okay, so this happened really last Monday or last Sunday overnight. At the time, I was in Israel following the news. And after it happened, the U.S. issued a reaction through the State Department Press Secretary Matthew Miller at source number 1. United States expresses its official condolences for the death of Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi, Foreign Minister Amir Abdollahian, and other members of their delegation in a helicopter crash in northwest Iran. As Iran selects a new president, we reaffirm our support for the Iranian people and their struggle for human rights and fundamental freedoms. Right, very powerful to say the least. And some would say, why express any condolences altogether? All right, this was, we know that there were, further expressions of condolences. Flags at the UN were flying half-mast. There was, further expressions of more formal condolences or more significant expressions of condolence, but that was the U.S. Sheila Nazarian, from whose last name you could tell is someone who has origins in Iran, wrote a piece in Newsweek last week. I will shed no tears for Ibrahim Raisi, the butcher of Tehran. On May 19th, the president of Iran was killed when his helicopter crashed in a mountainous region of his country. As a woman born in Iran, I feel not just a sense of celebration at the death of this evil man, but of relief. It is a feeling I share with a great many of my countrymen, and in particular countrywomen. To understand why, you have to know that Ibrahim Raisi, though rose by his brutal regime with the dignity of president, was a mass murderer responsible for atrocities and oppression in Iran and across the region. This is why he was known as the butcher of Tehran. The reaction to Raisi's death among Iranians was telling. Masih Alinejad captured the sentiment perfectly when she said, "On my social media, I see family members of those who were executed as a result of his orders cheering. People in Iran are celebrating. There are fireworks everywhere in different cities. They really see Raisi as an example of the whole system, of the whole regime. This spontaneous outpouring of joy reflects the deep-seated resentment most Iranians feel toward the cruel and corrupt theocratic regime that has stolen their dreams. Ibrahim Raisi's legacy is one of unimaginable cruelty and unyielding oppression. From his early days, Raisi epitomized the worst of Iran's theocratic regime. Nevertheless, many nations should know better, should know better, have expressed sympathy for his overdue demise, with the European Union sharing condolences on the death of this mass murderer. This compassion for such a killer is misplaced." All right, the idea someone is terrible, there should be no compassion. Right? If you're compassionate for the wicked, eventually will come back to be problematic for those who show that compassion. They're not going to be shown compassion in return. And just taking it forward for a religious response, the Arut Sheva, among other news outlets, reported that the Bat Yam rabbi said no Tachnun prayers following Raisi's death. Source number 3, Rabbi David Chai HaKohen, Dean of the Netivot HaTorah Yeshiva in Bat Yam, neighborhood rabbi in the city, has instructed the students to omit the Tachnun prayer during Monday's morning and afternoon prayers following the death of Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi in a helicopter crash. Tachnun prayer is a prayer of supplication, which is not said on festive days or days of Thanksgiving. The president was a very special hater of Israel, and he was the greatest of all the Iranians. And may it be God's will that the wolves in the forest where he fell will eat him. This is good news for the Jewish people. Even more than Haman, if we make a festival meal the day he was killed, then even more so we should not say Tachnun. was mentioned in the Mishnah Berurah, on the day of the intermediate days of Passover, he was hanged, and therefore at a special dish, a prayer of thanksgiving with song and dance was also held at the yeshiva, right? And so, for those who are not as familiar with weekday morning services, Monday and Thursday have an extra long Tafnan prayer, which is especially unwelcome among those who are trying to rush out to get to work. Being able to skip Tafnan Monday, Thursday is an extra special bonus, and that is what they did there. It was not necessarily the practice of most of the places people were davening. In JCAB, they said Tafnan. Also, a lot of this was happening just as they were getting there, so there was not enough time. But basically, by the time they'd fight over whether to say it or not, it would have been quicker just to say it. But in any event, that was a religious reaction. So you have the pro forma condolence and with the U.S. shift towards hope for the Iranian people. You have the recognition of those who are living there or those who know people live there, shedding no tears and recognizing there's what to celebrate. And you have a religious response from the Rabbi Bat Yam. There were others as well who went on the record doing this. And seeing the religious significance. Now, just before we open up to just any reactions, there was a very, I guess, widespread meme going around that had a picture of the tail of the helicopter with the number, I think it was 1136, and it had something to do with that equal the number of soldiers killed October 7th or something like that. There was something that there was a message being delivered, a divine message as part of this. If you dig a little more deeply online, the image of that helicopter crash was several years old. It was not Raisi's helicopter, but it does highlight the lengths people will go to try to find some additional significance, religious significance in situations like this. So here's the situation. Any questions, comments, reactions before we dig a little bit more deeply into some of the ways that Jewish texts and tradition responds to the death of enemies?
Well, I think that something that I wrote to you, that, we can't get stuck at that part of the struggle, because our struggle is that he's just one of many. Mm-hmm. And Vayakam, Melech Hadash, and it's always something else. But in addition, they rally, and their rallies, there's probably very frightened people, thousands. So they rally there because, they don't want to be found out. And then war and rallying this is what their reactions are usually in that side of the world, that culture.
Keep in mind, we're also getting a very curated view. In closed societies, you only have as much access as they're willing to give. Yeah. So, what Nazarian describes about, her experience of those who are more celebratory at his death, I'm rooting for that to be more the case than the stock images that the regime can, put out.
Also, the image when you talk about the butcher or the Vasa angel, from World War II, it's so stark, it's so real. And now he's gone, and we have to move on with the other pawns on the chessboard, unfortunately.
Right. So, after this is not the first time that an enemy of, the Jewish people or the enemy, paradigms of evil or, have been executed, have been taken out, right? Saddam Hussein, in there are other situations, Osama bin Laden, and we'll see some of the reactions to some of those situations, how they can inform this situation as well. But let's look at some of the verses. So there's a pasuk in Tehillim, chapter 58, verse 11. The righteous man will rejoice when he sees revenge. He will bathe his feet in the blood of the wicked. Right, the idea that the arch enemy of righteousness is wickedness, and when wickedness is destroyed, it's a reason for righteousness to rejoice. Right, we say every Friday, "Ohavei Hashem sinu ra," lovers of God hate wickedness. So there is this battle between good and evil where we want good to win, and here it says that the righteous rejoices when there is the blood of the wicked is spilled. At the same time, you flip in the other direction, and it's quoted in Pirkei Avot. It was the chapter that many read this past Shabbat. As we go from Pesach to Shavuot, there's 6 Shabbatot in the middle, and you can read a chapter of Avot each week. This is the 4th week. Shmuel HaKatan said, if your enemy falls, do not exult. The Hebrew has been full oivcha al tisamach. If he trips, let your heart not rejoice, lest the Lord see it and be displeased and avert his wrath from him. The idea from Mishlei, this idea that don't rejoice, because if you rejoice over the downfall of your enemy, maybe that's not going to be maybe that's not really a pure joy. There's a little bit too much pleasure in the fall of the enemy, and maybe God will take notice of that and notice that your intentions, your heart is not pure, and then redirect some of that anger from your enemy back to you. Then another verse in Proverbs, a little bit earlier on, source 6. When the righteous prosper, the city exults. When the wicked perish, there are shouts of joy. So you have the other direction, right? The wicked perish, there are shouts of joy. So as can be imagined, there's a lot of unpacking of some of these statements of these verses. So for example, the sources number 4 and 6 are introduced that who is the one who is rejoicing when the wicked fall, when the wicked perish, right? When the wicked are avenged, who will bathe his feet in the blood of the wicked? Tzaddikim, the righteous, right? The righteous have a right to rejoice, but the Hamon Am, the average person, his motivations might be somewhat suspect. So you have those who understand sources 4 and 6. The righteous are the ones can identify when it's the right time to celebrate the elimination of the wicked. And Shmuel HaKatan is talking about the regular person. If your enemy falls, don't exult, right? Who do you think you are? The righteous can celebrate. You, on the other hand, the rest of us are not able to do so. That's one reaction just on the surface level of these expressions. Another aspect that draws attention, right, is that source number 5 is found as a Mishnah in Avot, but essentially the Shmuel HaKatan doesn't say anything. Shmuel HaKatan quotes a pasuk. Shmuel HaKatan quoting a pasuk. Why is that a Mishnah? And different explanations are given. We'll see, one approach in a minute. But some point out that it is not uncommon for biblical teachings, especially from the prophets or the writings, to be overlooked by the typical student. Right. So much of our tradition focuses on the laws as opposed to the Tanakh, and so therefore it could be that Shmuel HaKatan, who was thought that this was a verse that is worth teaching, realized that the average student wouldn't encounter it unless he taught it in the academy as if it was a rabbinic teaching as well. Right? Sometimes even biblical verses require rabbinic reinforcement in order for them to make it to the radar screens of the average Jew. And maybe Shmuel HaKatan felt that people were sometimes a little bit too self-righteous about the feet of their enemies, and therefore wanted to make sure that people recognized this expression. So if we're asking how does the Bible respond? How does Tanakh respond? How does our tradition respond? Not unexpectedly, a little bit mixed. You can rejoice. Obviously, we hate evil, but when they are punished, should we be rejoicing or not? Well, on the one hand, yes, certainly the righteous. On the other hand, don't necessarily be so smug when the enemy falls, because you have to make sure that your intentions and emotions are pure, lest God direct God's wrath towards you as well. So, when it comes to some of the celebration of the defeat of our enemies, many would say that's the whole purpose of celebration. That's the whole purpose of Jewish rejoicing, right? We say it often. They tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. There's the idea that we won, our enemies were destroyed, and we eat. We already saw a reference already by Rabbi David Chai HaKohen in source number 3, Purim. What's Purim if not the destruction of Haman, right? Hanukkah, victory of the Maccabees. Pesach, the victory over the Egyptians. So isn't it very clear that Judaism has a very simple response to destruction of our enemies? It's part of our celebration. So here we come to a very famous example that prompts a lot of discussion as to whether this is, how accurate this is with regards to, specifically with regards to Pesach. And some of you may already be thinking, there's a very famous rabbinic tradition as the Jews were crossing the sea, and then the Egyptians crossed the sea, and then the Egyptians were drowned. And there's a rabbinic teaching we're going to look at one version of it in a minute in translation, but there's a rabbinic teaching quoted in the Talmud in several places that the angels were very enthusiastic over the fact that the Jews had been saved and the Egyptians had been drowned in the sea, and they wanted to praise God. And God said, how can you praise? You want to sing songs of praise? Maseh yadai tovim bayam v'atem omrim shira. You want to sing praise while my creations are drowning in the sea? And that's the expression in the Talmud. Now, the Jews did sing. The angels didn't sing, but the Jews did sing. But there is an approach to this that one of the reasons why we say half Hallel. Well, let's back up a second. All holidays we say Hallel, the Hallel Thanksgiving prayer.
Right.
We say the whole Hallel. On Shavuos, on Sukkot, on Hanukkah, we say the whole Hallel. On Pesach, we only say the whole Hallel in the beginning of the holiday, the first day or the first 2 days into the diaspora. And then we shift to what's called the half Hallel. It's not half Hallel. We take out two paragraphs, but it's called the half Hallel. So some understand this as being related to the fact that Passover is not a very good day to sing praises to God because of all the Egyptians who were killed. There were Egyptians who killed on the very night of the Exodus in the plague of the firstborn. And then the Egyptians killed a week later at the sea. We really have our enthusiasm tempered because of this. However, the first day of Passover commemorates a miracle. Whatever bloodshed took place is something that we can't help or stop or ignore, but we still have to praise God for the ultimate miracle. And so that's the idea that's expressed. However, it's not really found in very many texts, except source number 7. It's called a Midrash Harninu. It has a large discussion as to where exactly it's found in rabbinic sources. There's an article about this subject written by one of my predecessors in Atlantic Beach, Rabbi Basil Herring, on the subject, where he has a very long footnote discussing, trying to just where this comes from. He quotes it as a Midrash Haninu mentioned in the Shibbolei Haleket in the 14th century collection of Responsa. There are those who identify it as a Psikta to Rav Kahana, one of the other Agadic narrative Midrashim. Some of the teaching is found in the Yalkut Shimoni Midrash and a couple of different places. The sentiment is there. Finding the exact texts in a rabbinic literature is a little bit more complicated, but the way it's presented in this Midrash Haninu, source number 7, said Shmuel ben Abba, at the downfall of your enemy, do not rejoice. This refers to the drowning of the Egyptians. At that moment, the angels sought to sing God's praises. Said God, the work of my hands drowned in the sea, and you wish to sing songs before me? Therefore, we read the full Hallel only on the first day and night of Pesach. This is one of the few rabbinic sources that combines the idea of the death of the Egyptians leading to a minimizing of our celebration of our saying of Hallel. It's inferred, it's implied, but this is one of the few sources that has it explicitly. We limit our Hallel because of the death of the Egyptians. And there are many who dispute the very phenomenon. Just like we said before, it was the angels who got addressed and said, don't sing. The people are allowed to sing. Why then do we have a different Hallel the rest of Pesach? Why does Passover have the half Hallel? So there are other explanations that are presented that relate to that Hallel is not only a function of the celebration, it's a function of sacrifices, and the sacrifices over the Passover holidays, those 7-8 days, did not rise to the level of additional celebration the same way they do over the full 8 days of Sukkot. Hanukkah, of course, doesn't have specific sacrifices, so it's a whole different category. Basically, those who dispute this rationale presented by the Midrash in source number 7 dismiss it as the actual reason and provide other reasons. But here we have a source that says when our enemies are killed, that has to impact us because of our humanity as well. And it's carried forth into the rabbinic conversation about this. I don't want to call it the halachic conversation, but at least the rabbinic conversation by Rabbi Meir Simcha Cohen of Dvinsk, right, early 20th century in Poland in his Meshech Chachma. And he's talking about that part of the time of the Exodus in Parshat Bo, where the Jews leave Egypt. And he says that, uladati, this is my opinion, that for future generations, we are, God is giving a lesson for future generations. Ki kol amim b'datotehen hanimosiot yasu yom nitzachon yom hapel toiveim l'chag. Chag hanitzachon. That all other religions take the victory over their downfall of their enemies and make that the victorious celebration. Lo kain bi Yisrael. That's not what Jews do. Jews don't celebrate the downfall of their enemies. They don't celebrate a holiday, a joyous holiday over this. As it says, you don't celebrate when your enemies fall. Continuing, the end of the fourth line. When we celebrate Hanukkah, the major narrative and discussion of why we celebrate Hanukkah has to do with the rededication of the Mikdash and the lighting of the oil. And God's divine providence over God's divine providence over His nation. So you then have he says Hanukkah is not about the military victory; it's about the light. It's about the dedication to the temple. Right? There was no Navi or seer in Israel to explain it. Because the miracle of the oil took place inside with the Kohanim. And they did not want the generals to take charge, take control over the commemoration and celebration. They didn't want this to be about Jewish power and Jewish might. They wanted this to be about the Jewish soul and Jewish light. Right? So we don't celebrate Pesach because of the death of our enemies. We talk about the redemption of our people. We don't celebrate Hanukkah because of the victory over the Greeks. We celebrate it over the miraculous light and the rededication of our holy space. So what about Purim? Right? Isn't that all about Haman's destruction? We don't make the celebration on the day that Haman was hung, the day of the battle. The enemies were killed. This is not joy for the Jewish people. It's when they rested. It's when they caught their composure. He says this is explicit in the Yalkut. He quotes the source. He quotes the version in the Yalkut of source number 7. So you have, just to review, a couple of biblical verses that present two different approaches as to celebrating the death of the wicked or not celebrating the death of our enemies. Is it the wicked? Is it the enemies? What about the righteous? Right, and we see this topic comes up very much so with the saying of Hallel. Our minimizing our recitation of Hallel on Pesach, we recognize that that's a disputed subject as to whether it's the death of the Egyptians that leads to a minimized Hallel. But we do see Rameir Simcha Devinsk taking from the chronology of Pesach and the verses of Pesach a lesson. Jews don't celebrate military might. Jews don't celebrate death of enemies. Jews don't celebrate the war. Jews celebrate the light. Jews celebrate the soul. Jews celebrate the ability to move forward, not the destruction of our enemies, right? So, Hirsch Baruch Shekivanta. Questions or
Rabbi,
comments? Yes.
isn't there another example when we take the wine out of on that Seder, take a little wine out?
So some talk
Is that
about
the reason?
There's a whole discussion of that. And for more on that, this next year's or an upcoming Shabbos Hagadol Drasha coming your way.
Okay.
Look, we're not opposed to wanting to seek justice and vengeance. There's a whole Shvo Chamatcha Lagayim, pour out thy wrath upon your enemies. But we see that there does seem to be a sensitivity that does impact the Jewish response. And even if you want to dispute this, the example of Hallel, we have a certain approach of Meir Simcha of Dvinsk. Others, quote, there are others who are quoted in this way as having more of a look, we're not bloodthirsty. Right? We needed the victory, but that's not where we want to put our focus. One could draw a line for Meir Simcha of Dvinsk and say, we don't want to omit Tachnun because our enemy died that morning. Maybe.
Well,
so now, yeah.
Can I just say, perhaps we're not rejoicing because our enemy died. Perhaps we're rejoicing because of the removal of a continued threat to the Jewish people. I mean, that's the way I look at it with this Iranian president.
So there's another, we'll see another approach. The question, how that necessarily impacts Tachnun is probably a separate question. Right, something like that. Right. Well, correct. So a specific threat being erased is progress, but isn't necessarily something to be recognized. I didn't see anyone saying Hallel on this. No one's saying this is a miracle. What we have seen, what we're looking at is what hints do we have towards how we can respond. We have, look, no one's saying any of us has to, no one needs to shed a tear over his death. But we are seeing that there's less rejoicing when there are casualties, when people die in war, even if there are enemies. And whether this rose to the level of impacting our whole Pesach celebration, or as a general rule, Meir Simcha of Dvinsk really, he's not saying you don't fight, but he's saying you don't celebrate the victory, you don't celebrate the death of the enemies, you don't celebrate the military so much. That's not a Jewish response. There's another way of looking at it. And these are not necessarily completely mutually exclusive approaches, but there's another textual guide here, and that comes from a Gemara in Megillah. So this is a Gemara Megillah 16a, where it's describing the whole episode where the king wakes up and he can't sleep, and he has the Book of Chronicles read, and he reads about Mordechai, and Haman's in the courtyard. They bring Haman in, and what do you want to do to the person the king wants to honor? Ride the horse, wear the clothes, wear the crown. The rabbis understand this as putting a bit of suspicion into the king as to why does Haman want to, Haman thinks it's him. Where's he getting this idea from? But so the Gemara has various traditions as to what else is going on in this story. And part of that is that Mordechai isn't able to go do this unless he gets a haircut, because Mordechai, as we had read earlier in the Megillah, was mourning. He was wearing sak ve'efer, and to be brought into the king's presence for this honor, he needed a haircut. And it says that Haman had to, as part of the process of doing what the king said, of getting Mordechai in the clothes and on the horse, had to give Mordechai a haircut. So the Gemara continues, after Haman trimmed his hair, Haman dressed Mordechai in the royal garments. Haman then said to him, mount the horse and ride. Mordechai said, I'm unable. My strength has waned from the days of fasting that I observed, right? Mordechai was in a state of mourning and fasting. So he's basically saying, I can't get up myself. So Haman then stooped down before him, and Mordechai ascended on him, right? He gave him an alley-oop, but he basically bent down so Mordechai could step on his back as if it was kind of a stool and get up onto the horse. As he was ascending the horse, Mordechai gave Haman a kick. So, Mordechai took advantage of this opportunity to get another jab literally at Haman. And Haman said, wait a second, don't you have a verse in your tradition, do not rejoice while your enemy falls? What, Mordechai, you're enjoying this? I have to help you and you're giving me a kick while doing this? That's not a Jewish thing to do. Mordechai said to him, this statement applies only to the Jews, but with regard to you, it is written, and you shall tread upon their high places. So Mordechai, the rabbis say that Mordechai invoked another verse, homiletically applying to Haman. No. Jewish enemies, you can't rejoice over their downfall. But for you, Haman, I can step all over you. So for some, this is a tradition of when we have our enemies, we should take every opportunity we can to bring them down and exult over their downfall. So in Rabbeinu Yonah, the 13th century commentary, Yonah Sharondi, author of the Sharei Tshuva, has a commentary on Pirkei Avot, where he then discusses this idea of rejoicing over our enemies' downfall as being appropriate, but it has to be bitmimut, it has to be genuine. Right, what's happening with Mordechai and Haman and Mordechai's jab and the like, that's some rabbinic homiletical jousting that's taking place among the rabbis. But it does open up the idea that Mordechai is saying our non-Jewish enemies are deserving of our celebrating their downfall. Rabbeinu Yonah says it has to be l'shem shamayim. Source number 10. What does Shmuel come to let us hear with this? Is this not a full verse as Shlomo stated, right? He's addressing the question that we referenced before. Shmuel HaKatan says nothing. All he does is quote a verse from Proverbs. Rather, once Shmuel was accustomed to saying those verses, it is something needed, and people stumble in it. Like we had mentioned before, Shmuel was reminding people a very important principle. Since even when the enemy is wicked, one should not be happy in the bad that happens to him, except only for the sake of God. We want to say that this righteous one should not be happy in the fall of the wicked, unless the intention of his joy is because his fall is a manifestation of God's glory, and not because of his hating him. You can't take any pleasure in it. If you're celebrating the downfall of the enemy, it has to be because there's a genuine appreciation for the evil that is no longer here. You're not celebrating the downfall of the person, the death of the person. You're celebrating the elimination of this threat, maybe along the lines of what Hirsch was saying before. And this is something that I think also finds expression, something that was written by Dennis Prager. And this was, some 13 years ago, exactly after the assassination, right, of Osama bin Laden. The argument is that no person's death should be celebrated. Therefore, celebration of bin Laden's death is morally questionable. Likewise, many Jews, including rabbis, have cited traditional, though sometimes seemingly conflicting Jewish attitudes regarding the death of evildoers. It's one thing to celebrate the fall of one's personal enemies, quite another to celebrate the fall of evil individuals. The two proverb citations are not contradictory. The vast majority of our personal enemies are not evil people. Therefore, we should not exult over their downfall. And the vast majority of truly evil people are not our personal enemies. Bin Laden was not my personal enemy. He was the enemy of all that is good on earth. It seems to me that if one does not celebrate the death of a truly evil person, one is not celebrating the triumph of good over evil. I do not say one can honestly say I'm thrilled that bin Laden can no longer murder men, women, and children, but I do not celebrate his death. You do celebrate the elimination of evil. And so he's Prager, who is a yeshiva high school graduate, is being midayek. Right? It's when your own personal enemy doesn't falters, don't celebrate. That's no reason to be happy. At the same time, at the elimination of evil, the righteous man will rejoice. Right? It's the difference between how you look at the individual. Right? If it's your own personal enemy, that's not a reason to rejoice. If it minimizes evil, that is a reason to rejoice. All those rabbis and others who think it is immoral or un-Jewish to celebrate bin Laden's death will one day have to confront a Jew named Ari Hassenberg, a prisoner at Auschwitz-Birkenau. As quoted by Holocaust historian Saul Friedlander, after one of the Auschwitz subcamps was bombed by the Allies, Hassenberg's reaction was to see a killed German. That was why we enjoyed the bombing. Was Hassenberg's reaction wrong or un-Jewish? I don't think so. What I suspect distinguishes Hassenberg from those who lament celebrating the death of the truly evil is that Hassenberg experienced true evil. Right? Thinking back to the way that Sheila Nazarian referenced the people who are in Iran and their reaction, the people who directly were impacted by the butcher of Tehran, that their reaction is more understandable. So, in a sense, we have, a way maybe to understand both sides of the equation. You have those who are more sensitive, using the Passover example as referenced by rabbinic tradition as maybe, not wanting to engage in type of a celebration over the fall of our enemies. You have those who look at the Purim example more specifically as a reason to do so. Really, it should be, similar to the expression also in Pirkei Avos was that as long as it's l'shem shamayim as presented Rabbeinu Yonah. And the way Prager does, I think, a fairly good job of being midayek, of being specific in interpreting the difference between the various biblical verses and approaches, that there's reason to rejoice the elimination of evil, not necessarily the downfall of our personal enemies. And this was something that Sivan Rav Meir found reference to in our Haftorah this past Shabbat. Source number 12. There's another verse, the last of the Haftarah that we read in Shul. Behold, I am the Lord, the God of all flesh. Is there anything too hard for me? Right. We are used to asking what will be and getting answers from panels of retired commentators and experts. This verse reminds us that we do not exclusively determine the plot, and with all due respect to the experts, reality often surprises. Sometimes, unfortunately, with difficult scenarios, but sometimes with events that amaze us for the better. The progression of history towards a positive direction, success that we hadn't even imagined. Right? The fact that the president of Iran, who was a tremendous force for evil, is no longer. It's a step in the right direction. Don't say tachnun, say dance, this and that. Maybe that goes a little far, but to recognize that we're living in a not just a cosmic drama, but a divine drama. To take a note of these events, which is why I think so many people were looking for those the connections between October 7th and the wreckage and the debris, even though it turned out to be a fake picture or an old picture, not connected to Raisi. And I do think that there is something that also has to be said within the discussion of how people react, and it's a source that we looked at a couple years back when we were talking about buying German cars, and what about forgiving Nazis? So this was a comment Rabbi Shlomo Aviner said. He was asking you to buy German products, and he said, no, there's no prohibition. There's no prohibition to purchase German products. Ein isur liknot totzaret Germanit. Ach behachlat yesh ma'ala limana bikach. But there certainly, may be a value in not buying them. Ach zehu cheshbon ishi shel kol echad v'achad. It's everyone's personal reaction. And I think that we see that this scenario of the elimination of evil or the downfall of the wicked or the destruction or death of enemies, has elicited different reactions. Some more stridently supportive and festive, some more cautious, some more strategic. And I think that Rabbi Aviner's comment that it's a very much a personal cheshbon is something that the Jewish tradition supports as well.
Right. Word cheshbon is a strong word, right? It's about self judgment, but also what about the Iranian Jews that were so much a part of the Shah's? Tons of them, hundreds and hundreds. What a what a turn of events,
Right. Look, like we said a few minutes ago, for those who are living under Raisi, it's a much more personal, direct reaction. Those of us who read about it in the headlines and aware of Iran's role as the head of the snake or the head of the octopus and the different tentacles. It's definitely conceptually a better thing, but it doesn't have the same imminence. And
Right.
yeah,
It behooves Jews not to celebrate in too uninhibited a fashion. We should always be aware that there are more evil people coming, according to our history.
well, so that's why, on some level, that's why we should celebrate we should celebrate as evil people are eliminated, and hopefully that same will happen for the next one. But it is clear that there's no one strident. There's what we can't just say the Jewish view is not to say tachnun or to say tachnun or to celebrate. We recognize that we're not just verses that can be interpreted differently, not just rabbinic statements of the Talmud that go in different directions, but we see that it was, you have, some of our great thinkers who have, tried to straddle a different view. Some would say that, it's a very accommodating, Rabbi Meir Simcha of Dvinsk is very hesitant to celebrate the downfall of the enemy. Rabbeinu Yonah wants us to, try and be l'shem shamayim. Maybe that, the differentiation being l'shem shamayim can be that we're not celebrating the death of our enemy. We're celebrating the lessening of evil in the world, the way Prager makes that distinction. And it's going to be a very personal reaction at times. And, we have to maybe think about our own spiritual, in general, our approach to some of these things. And I think, but like Al, I think it's a good way to conclude the fact that, there will be more evil, and hopefully that evil will also be resisted and ultimately taken down. That hopefully is, that's what we say every single day. And we didn't get, so we could have talked about that also, the V'lam Alshinim blessing, right? The extra blessing, Lishmon Esrei, which hopes for the elimination of evil, which was also composed by Shmuel HaKatan, who's the one who says, don't celebrate. They say Shmuel HaKatan had this type of proper approach. He had the right balance in terms of how to want the end of evil, but not the destruction of individual people. And but we hope that for our enemies and for all evil, al tihi tikva, there should be no hope, because we're the ones who have odo avda tikvatenu. We're the ones who have continued hope that evil will be vanquished.